I'm just going to give a short presentation, a little bit more on nutrition and feed budgeting, but also I thought I'd just quickly cover a selection of ewes and which one of those ewes within the groups that you've chosen to retain that you might choose. We've heard a little bit already this morning, so I won't labour the point, but I think it's just useful to go over some of those key things. So just remembering about energy, and we've heard about energy is king. That's what we need. But energy in lactation, it increases and peaks at about 3 weeks into lactation. So once the ewe's had the lamb, she's building up and her energy requirement, so she can build up her milk, and then it starts to taper off. And the other thing to remember is twinning ewes require about 30% more than a single bearing ewe, and that this year, with the reported number of lambs, a lot of those lambs are going to be twins this year. We're hearing 50 to 60% twinning rates were scanned earlier in the year. So there are a lot of ewes carrying twins, and they have that extra burden. Once the lambs are weaned, the ewes' requirements drop down to about that 8.5, depending on her frame size and her condition. So it's really important. That's a big shift in her requirement, but we need to focus on her and getting her back into condition for the next season. And as you've heard from John, there's profit to be made from doing that. And also, if you are looking at confinement, remember it's about a 20% saving, because those animals aren't racing around trying to find a green pick in the paddock and using up energy that way. Just tried to capture a little bit there on maintaining a ewe in score 2 on low pasture. About 7 megajoules per day she needs, and depending on the feed source, if it's oats at 10 megajoules a kilo, you're looking at about 700 grams per day. This is the total diet, or about 600 grams of a 12 megajoule feed like barley, and it'll be a bit less for lupins. And I'm assuming the lupin price is climbing after this number of talks section. And if you're in confinement, you're looking around that 6 megajoule per day. But we do need to know what she's getting from the paddock, and remembering to leave some feed in the paddock over spring so that you're protecting your land surfaces as well. That's particularly important. Now I just want to quickly show you a graph, and this is taken from a tool that we have online at the department site, and some of you may not have seen it, so I won't labour the content, but just to show you what we can get from that. So it's a sheep feed calculator, and the address is down the bottom there, so if you search on annual feed budget for sheep on the department site, that will come up. This tool gives you an opportunity to choose the class of sheep. If it's used when they're pregnant or when they were joined, it allows you to select a default value for the pasture availability, or you can put that in and choose your feed that you want to use. Now, as you can see on my mouse has disappeared on the graph. There's the blue line is the requirement for the animal, and at this stage I've got a ewe in there lambing in June, so you can see her increase in energy required over the year. The very light green fade in the background is the poor pasture I've put in for this year, and these green bars really show you the amount of barley, which is the feed I selected, to be fed per month, and on this side it'll give you a monthly cost, and when you use the calculator it'll present that in a table as well, and it'll give you a per head per day and a total for the year. So it's just a really good way to get that snapshot of planning what sort of feed you're going to require. You can do Wieners in there as well. Won't touch too much on the weaner requirements because we've talked a little bit about that, but of course as the animal grows and becomes larger, they have a higher energy requirement, and if you want them to grow faster, of course they have a higher energy requirement. But with weaners, it's not just about energy, as we've heard, it's about protein as well. You can feed them as much energy as you like, but if protein's limited, they won't achieve the growth rate. And the converse is true. If you feed them as much protein as you can get into them, but the energy's not there, they still won't grow. So for weaners, it's about matching protein and energy so they can grow. This slide just shows, I've just taken a diet like, say for example, barley, 11 megajoules per kilo. The feed stuff is 11 megajoules per kilo, so that's the diet. And as you can see on here that we've got growth rates along here and crude protein along the bottom row. If you come to crude protein of 8, which is too low for weaners, it was more like a dry ewe, you can see it doesn't matter if you feed them 1.1 kilos a day or 0.9 kilos a day or 0.7 kilos a day, you're going to get about the same growth rate because it's protein that's limiting. Once you get up over the 12, 13 level, then you'll actually be able to utilise the energy that's in there, and it'll be energy limiting. This graph was some work that came out of the Lifetime Wool project and a couple of others as well, and it talks about something that we hear a lot, which is if weaners aren't growing, they're dying. So to maintain a weaner, in effect, is to have them growing at a minimum of about 30 grams per head per day, about 1 kilo a month. If they're not growing at all, they're not coping. So it's about growth. But coming back to weaning weight and growth rate, this slide shows that if you're going to wean very light animals, so 20% of their mature weight, so about 10 kilos. If you're weaning at 10 kilos, the weaner's survival is quite low if you're only letting them grow at about 0.5 kilo a month. That's very low growth rate. If you want to boost their survival, it's about having them growing faster. So as long as they're growing faster, you can lift their survival if you're having to wean them at a very low weight. However, once you're up at about 50% of their adult weight, so 25, 30 kilos, then growth rate post-weaning isn't so important because they've already done a lot of that preliminary growth which has got them on the path. So just something to remember, the earlier you wean them, the much more important the growth rate is post-weaning for survival. We talked a little bit about least cost rations, and we do have a calculator, a feed cost calculator on the Ag Department site as well. Hopefully this will come up. And it'll allow you to choose one feed, it'll put in some default values, put in your on-farm cost, and it'll convert it to cents per megajoule or the amount of protein. The other thing it allows you to do is choose a number of different feeds and work out a least cost ration. So one of the things with lupins, and we've heard about the value of lupins, if you have a limited supply of lupins, and we know that lupins are in the 30% realm for protein, we don't actually need 30% protein. You can add other feedstuffs to still have your 15-16% protein, but so it's effectively extending the life of your lupins. This calculator gives you an opportunity to choose something, choose your feed, put in a cost per farm. Nope, sorry. Let's put in 350. I click on that, it'll it'll give you some default figures here, and at that price it's saying it's about 3 megajoules per kilo, 3 cents per megajoule as fed. And your other option is to put in another feed. It's a bit awkward. So if we choose something like barley, cost per farm, I'll go with 250 just to make it easier. And you can see it's put in some default figures, and it's 2 cents a megajoule as fed. The calculator also allows you now to change the proportion of lupins and barley, those two feeds that you've put in. If you can see down here, it's now at 20% lupins, 80% barley. Your protein as fed is 14%. You may go, well, I actually want a bit more than that, so I'll move the slider to 15, so it gets to protein as 15%, and you can see it's 25% lupins to 75 barley. But we're looking at a feed cost of about 2 cents, 2 cents a megajoule. So that's just another tool that's on the website that may be of useful. Just want to very quickly go through which ewes to keep, and we talked about keeping the ewes, those 2.5, 3.5, was a class that John and Ashley identified as key because they've got reproductive and production potential for longer, but they're also a proven performer at that point. Just to have a look at this graph here, you can see at about year 4.5, that's when they reach their peak of reproduction, and it tails off a little bit from there, but it is still usually higher than their reproduction as a maiden. Many of you will have seen this slide many times before, but it's still a really key one to remember. And last season showed everybody that, I think, as ewe condition score at joining increases, you'll get a decrease in dry ewes and an increase in twinning ewes. And that's the thing with merinos. You can't go, right, I want to get them in good nick so I have less dries, but I want them all to be single. Sorry, doesn't happen. You're going to get more twinning ewes, so just need to be prepared. When they're in good condition, you're going to have more twinning ewes, so learn how to manage them. The other thing that a lot of people do, and there's some really good opportunities, is that pregnancy scanning, and I'm talking pregnancy scanning for multiples, not pregnancy scanning for wet and dry. Pregnancy scanning for multiples costs a little bit more per head to scan. However, don't forget, you're still bringing them in. All the other costs are the same. So the actual extra cost for multiple scanning is really quite low, but the benefit is you actually get some key information. You get the information of what the potential of the flock is. You can also use it to cull animals who aren't performing. The other part of information is wet and drying, either at marking or if you're pretty good at weaning. And this is some data from New South Wales flocks. So someone did comment that we have modern merinos here. They might be a little different, but I'll leave that to you. But I think one of the key things is that this is the first two lambings along the bottom. So this is their early life reproduction. This is the lambs weaned per ewe joined for their later years of reproduction. So you can see if there's no successful pregnancies for the first 2 years, that ewe is likely to produce only one lamb in the rest of her joinings later in life. Dry once and lost once. She's had one successful pregnancy. Well, she's had one pregnancy but lost it. There's quite a big jump for her later in life. So she's been unlucky perhaps once, but she's not barren. She's had a lamb. And then it continues through to 2 successful pregnancies, raising at least one lamb in each of those pregnancies. There is a reason to cull on wet and dry, but as John, I think, would tell you, that if you're going to cull on wet and dry in the first year, which is a lot less accurate than this, then if you're going to cull heavily on that, what are you going to replace them with in your ewe flock? It's probably going to be maidens who you also don't know how they perform. So having 2 years reproduction data is much better. Wool production is the other one that you might like to consider when you're making culling decisions. The solid line is the change in fibre diameter, so it increases from a hogget through to about 6 years old and then drops off a little bit. And as you can see, clean fleece weight peaks at around the 3 years old and gradually drops off as well. So that might be some of the influence. And there's just some key points there, but it's an opportunity at weaning is to ensure that you take off the thinner ewes so you can preferentially feed them. And don't forget, those thinner ewes are probably twin-bearing ewes anyway, so you want to give them the best chance to get pregnant. And I'll leave it there. So has anyone got any questions on that? Any decisions, anything out in the regions?
Mandy, John Blake, I have two questions if I may.
Yep.
One is, will these slides be circulated to participants?
Yes, we're hoping that we'll have some PDF versions of presentations so that people can have them another look at that, because I know sometimes, particularly in the regions, it's hard to see those, and we are recording the session as well.
Thanks, Mandy. And the second question was, we like the example plan Ashley had for autumn, and we wonder whether you or Ashley have got an example plan as we run into spring with the tipping points, the tipping point approach.
So you're asking for it's like the exit strategy approach, but done in spring. Ashley, have you whipped that one up?
No, I can.
Nobody can, he says, and I think a lot of what he presented this morning was part of that plan, and there's so many options there, but those sorts of planning, that sort of planning is an individual enterprise, I imagine, but example plan you feel would be useful for people to get their heads around what that might be.
John's got Ed there. Ed can do it for him.
Ashley said, John, you've got Ed next to him. Ed can do one for you.
Thanks, I'll get on to Ed.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you so much to the speakers and the quality of information that we've heard today. It's certainly been excellent. Thank you to Mel Dowling for doing all the organising and keeping everyone in the right place at the right time and getting people at the right place at the right time. Safe travels, and we may talk again later in the season. So thank you very much.